It's a lot more complicated than just Dr. Murray was at his bedside when he died. Circumstances had been leading up to this day for years.
Michael Jackson's final words have shattered years of silence and confirmed what many have feared all along. He was taken from this world not by chance, not by neglect, but through a deliberate and sinister plot by forces hiding in plain sight. We picture it now, the dimly lit room, the king of pop exhausted, his body frail from endless rehearsals, leaning close to his brother with eyes wide and voice trembling. He whispers, almost too soft to catch, "They're going to take me." That look of dread, that warning, is the kind of confession that chills the blood. Was it a prophecy? A desperate cry for help? Or the haunting final clue from a man who knew the walls were closing in?
Michael graduated from pain meds to anesthesia. He used it to sleep, and he became shockingly reliant on it. A lot of people were saying privately, Michael's addictions and the cancellation of the Dangerous tour were directly connected.
We know June 25th, 2009 is written into history as the day the world lost its greatest performer. But long before the official report stamped homicide, Michael himself was leaving breadcrumbs, muttering to those he trusted that powerful figures wanted him silenced. Imagine being in his brother's shoes, hearing those words, watching Michael's face etched with terror. The king of pop wasn't talking about stage fright or financial ruin. He was convinced someone had a plan. And if we connect the dots, it wasn't paranoia. It was foresight. The chilling part is how closely his warning ties to what followed. He collapsed in his Los Angeles mansion, rushed to the hospital, pronounced gone at the age of 50. The world was told he had suffered an overdose of propofol, a hospital anesthetic never meant for a bedroom. His personal doctor, Conrad Murray, stood trial, convicted of involuntary manslaughter, labeled reckless and negligent. But was Murray truly the puppet master? Or was he just the face they chose to hang the blame on, a convenient scapegoat while the real architect slipped into the shadows?
As you may already know, after my tour ended, I remain out of the country undergoing treatment for a dependency on pain medication. This medication was initially prescribed to see the excruciating pain that I was suffering after recent reconstructive surgery on my scalp.
And here's where the story takes a darker turn, because Michael Jackson wasn't just an entertainer, he was an empire. At the height of his career, he owned one of the most lucrative music catalogs on earth, with rights to the Beatles' legendary work, a collection worth billions of dollars. Insiders have whispered for years that this catalog painted a target on his back. Think about it. The same industry that crowned him king might have decided it was easier to bring him down than let him walk back onto the throne with that kind of power. We can't ignore that only weeks after his passing, control of his estate shifted into new hands. Deals were struck, and suddenly the treasures Michael fought to protect were in play. What if the comeback tour was never supposed to happen? What if his end was penciled into a balance sheet long before the curtain could rise? Some family members said it outright. LaToya claimed her brother told her he'd be taken for his music catalog and estate. Paris, his only daughter, later echoed the belief, calling it a setup. And then there are the notes Michael reportedly left behind, scribbled pleas about shadowy figures trying to control his life, men in suits steering his finances, strangers firing loyal staff so he could be isolated. If those warnings were real, then Conrad Murray wasn't the story. He was the distraction. The more we look at those final weeks, the stranger it becomes. Michael was rehearsing at the Staples Center just 2 days before the collapse. Fans now analyze leaked rehearsal videos frame by frame, pointing to the exhaustion etched across his face. He looked tired, yes, but also wary, like a man rehearsing for more than a stage show, as though he was rehearsing his last stand. And still he pushed forward, determined to prove to the world that he was ready, but behind closed doors, he was battling the kind of insomnia that would keep him awake until morning. That's when the enablers came in.
There's nothing I can do to take it back. And if someone was hurt by it, saying I'm sorry.
Michael begged for milk, his nickname for propofol, the way a man in chains begs for water. It wasn't just about sleep, it was dependence, the perfect opening for control. The toxicology report revealed not just propofol, but a cocktail of sedatives in his system. Lorazepam, midazolam, diazepam, lidocaine, ephedrine, a pharmacy's worth of chemicals coursing through his body, substances that should never have been stacked together. Former insiders say this wasn't care, it was sabotage disguised as treatment. Keep him weak, keep him foggy, keep him desperate enough to hand his life over to the very people tightening the grip around him. If we follow that thread, the pattern looks less like negligence and more like strategy. Each dose tethered him further, each night eroded his strength, until his voice barely rose above a whisper when he told his brother, they were going to end him. Imagine the irony. The man who electrified stadiums, reduced in his final hours to pleading softly in his own home, surrounded not by family, but by contracts, handlers, and a physician paid $150,000 a month to stand guard. And yet, that guard stepped away, made phone calls, left Micheal unmonitored while the so-called medicine pushed him over the edge. So we're left with questions no courtroom ever fully answered. Was Drummery simply careless, or was he acting under orders, a hired hand in a much larger operation? Who benefited most from Michael's sudden silence, and why was he silenced just as he was planning his triumphant return? The comeback that might have rewritten his legacy? The concerts that would have filled 50 arenas and put him back on top? Why was the king of pop taken off the board before the first note was played? So we start where the trail goes cold on paper and hot in whispers, the toxicology files that never saw the light of day. The coroner confirmed the cause and the manner, then locked away the rest at the request of investigators. Parts of the record were kept under seal, a stark reminder that the most decisive pages are sometimes the ones the public never gets to read. We're left with official headings and redacted details, a story told in fragments, while the essential chemistry of that morning sits behind a gate. Why were key figures and precise dosages quarantined from the public record? Why were some vials and labels described broadly while others seemed to vanish into legal fog? In a case that reshaped pop culture overnight, those missing lines aren't just technicalities. They're the space where motive can hide.
I never enabled his addiction, which I was not aware of. Your Honor, I am an innocent man. They accused me of having Micheal on a 3-hour propofol infusion. That was false.
We know the coroner laid down a decisive line, then held back the complete toxicology results while the LA police and prosecutors continued their work. That decision, perfectly standard in a high-stakes probe, also became rocket fuel for every theory that followed. If the aim was to keep the process clean, the effect was the opposite. Silence drew maps where names might have been. Fans pressed for more. Family members asked what else was mixed into Michael's veins and whether the roster of hands involved stretched beyond a single white coat. If the ledger of substances included not only the hospital-grade sleep agent, but a knot of other sedatives, why did the world only get the headline and not the footnotes? We're not talking about curiosity, we're talking about the chain of custody for a legend's final hours. When reports mentioned a polypharmacy, the technical catch-all that means more than one substance was present, it answered nothing and hinted at everything. Multiple sedatives were identified by name and coverage sourced to court records, but the full lab tables remained under wraps. Picture it. A house in Holmby Hills, cabinets of unlabeled bottles, and a timetable that slides by minutes that matter. Now add secrecy. That combination is how rumor becomes religion. Even level-headed observers started asking whether the incomplete public picture protected an active case or protected reputations that never wanted daylight. That's why the official phrase, the manner of demise, has been ruled homicide, landed like a thunderclap, and paradoxically opened even more doors than it closed. On one side, we had a jury concluding a private physician's care was criminally negligent. On the other, we had millions asking whether the physician was the whole story or the most convenient story. We can debate framing all day, but sequence is stubborn. In the weeks following the loss, agencies from city to state to federal turned their attention to prescribers, record keepers, and supply lines. If this had been one man, one night, one catastrophic mistake, would the net have needed to stretch that wide?
When I do those solo albums and I'm doing all kinds of different music, it's wonderful. I feel like I'm accomplishing what I'm supposed to do.
And you don't feel guilty or worried about your brothers?
No.
Pull the camera back and we see the stakes that made everything combustible. Michael was gearing up for 50 nights in London, a cash engine for promoters, insurers, and anyone attached to the brand. He also sat on rights that industry veterans privately called a crown vault, a catalog whose valuation made executives breathe differently. Like every activist, event planners, men and women, a former road manager claims a series of last-minute meetings convened around him in the months before the comeback. Meetings where assurances were demanded, signatures were accelerated, and gatekeepers aligned like chess pieces before a decisive move. 3 industry veterans insist the financial pressure to deliver those first 10 nights, then the full run, was so intense that failure is not an option wasn't a slogan, it was policy. The label hasn't commented. What we have, again, is pressure measured not only in dollars, but in incentive, and then we arrive at the words that refuse to fade, delivered not by lawyers or executives, but by a daughter who grew up inside the story. Paris Jackson did not hedge. In her first deep interview about that June morning and everything orbiting it, she used the kind of language that makes PR teams break into a sweat. It was a setup, she said. All arrows point to that. Those aren't throwaway lines. They're a thesis. Paris has described herself as playing a high-stakes chess game, a slow reveal, rather than a flash of accusations, and we have to ask what pieces she sees that the public can't. She was a minor when the shock hit. She's an adult, speaking now, and her conviction has only sharpened. The danger of being that sure and that public is obvious. The power of it is obvious too. We study her timeline and find breadcrumbs, occasional social posts that reference surveillance without naming watchers, offhand comments about rooms where crucial decisions were made in her father's name while he rehearsed through the night and sat in traffic by day. Friends of the family say she keeps receipts, literally, addresses, dates, the sequence of who appeared at the house when, who had access to the upstairs and who didn't. Those hints land differently when set against the sealed lab pages. What if the missing numbers don't just upset a dosing chart? What if they complicate a narrative about the origin of certain vials and the authority to administer them? There's also the emotional math. We watch Paris navigate public grief while holding a private ledger of inconsistencies. She has been careful not to implicate the convicted physician directly in her broader claims. Her emphasis has consistently been on the network, the players around the room, the ones who write contracts instead of prescriptions. That's not a teenager's impulse. That's the language of someone who knows that in entertainment, you rarely find a single smoking gun. You find a room full of gloves that all smell the same. If she is indeed playing long chess, the board likely stretches from LA to London to corporate suites where artists are assets and assets are leverage.
But they say that this tunnel connects to the Playboy Mansion. You guys remember that? Hugh Hefner, the guy who lived with all those women in his mansion? There's no available evidence right now. However, reports are noting that Combs mansions do have a pool with an underwater swimming tunnel. They say it's not connected to the Playboy Mansion, but there is a reason why the Playboy Mansion keeps coming up.
Meanwhile, other voices surrounded the family with versions of the same suspicion. LaToya alleged that the catalog itself painted a target on her brother. She has pointed to specific advisors whose first moves isolated Michael, replaced loyalists, and made him reliant on a narrow corridor of handlers. The sequence matches what insiders describe as a classic choke point. You control communications, access, and scheduling, and soon the star is a passenger in his own life. Fold in medical dependence, and the choke becomes a noose. Not by force in the literal sense, but by routine. The coroner gave us a clinical label. The family gave us a context. A man encircled. What keeps us up at night are the gaps no verdict can fill. The phone records that show calls when attention should have been unbroken. The timeline that stretches well past the first sign of trouble before emergency help is summoned. The stash of sedatives and anesthetics that had no place off a hospital floor. Even the suggestion from investigators that the physician had administered hospital-grade sleep aids nightly over a 6-week period rivals anything we've seen in show business cautionary tales. If that was the nightly baseline, who signed off, who sourced it, and who was in the loop when those supplies were replenished? Another layer, the media postscript snapped into place with eerie efficiency. A memorial drew people across continents. A documentary from rehearsals hit theaters, turned profits, and reintroduced a narrative of discipline and genius in the days right before the collapse. Posthumous releases kept the machine humming. None of that is nefarious by default. Estates exist to manage legacies, but to those who believe foul play was more than a possibility, the speed of the rollout felt like a curtain dropping before the final scene had even played. The business of remembrance can sometimes look like the business of moving on.
Puff Daddy flipped out regarding Michael Jackson at a party in Los Angeles. Apparently, a bunch of celebrities got together and they were having a tribute party for Michael Jackson. And one of Michael Jackson's songs was playing. What was the name of the song?
A Man in the Mirror.
Man in the Mirror was playing. There we go. And you know, the celebrities like Queen Latifah, Wesley Snipes, Hill Harper, they were all dancing, having a good time to his music.
We can't ignore how certain names bubbled up in the aftermath. Dermatologists with celebrity practices, prescribers with reputations for handing out comfort in a syringe, office assistants who watched rooms empty of safeguards. A former clinic staffer alleges that a Beverly Hills office kept a standing list of codenames for pickups that avoided awkward questions at the counter. Law enforcement did look at multiple physicians, and even the state's top legal office took an interest in certain prescribing patterns. The fact that only one man stood in the dock doesn't prove the net came up empty. It proves only that the strongest line of proof ended there. Stack all of it side by side, and the picture that emerges is not tidy. On paper, a doctor made catastrophic choices and a court responded. In the shadows, an icon tried to sleep while a corridor of decisions made him weaker, more isolated, more malleable. The sealed pages keep the chemistry of his final hours partially obscured. The business imperatives keep the flow of content uninterrupted. The daughter, now grown, points to a board full of arrows, and the rest of us are left tracing outlines, comparing rehearsals full of spark with a bedroom scene that rewrote everything. If we strip away the noise and stay with the spine, we're back at the questions that first lit the fuse. If those withheld lab details were fully opened, would they show something as simple as a dosage misjudged, or a rhythm of substances that implies choreography? If agency evidence files were unsealed, would they reveal a supply chain that starts far from a bedside? If the estate records around certain posthumous deals were placed next to the calendar of the comeback, would the incentives map change? These aren't accusations, they're coordinates. And until the map is shared, the story resists an ending.
Guys, they found underground tunnels at Diddy's homes. This was first brought up by Shadow of Ezra, where he talked about the underground tunnels in Diddy's luxurious Los Angeles mansion. It was an underwater swimming tunnel leading to a mysterious grotto, reminiscent of an ancient and modern human use of caves.
Which leaves us with the line that won't budge, Paris Jackson's voice, steady and unblinking. It was a setup. All arrows point to that. She isn't asking for our permission to believe it. She's telling us the conclusion she reached after living with the artifacts and the silence. Frame her as a whistleblower or frame her as a grieving daughter who cannot accept a courtroom's final punctuation. Either way, her certainty re-centers the narrative. When she says she's engaged in a long game, we hear not bluster but strategy. You don't play chess unless you're confident about what's on the other side of the board. And so we hover at the edge of a truth that still feels dangerous to touch. The sealed files, the missing labels, the investor-grade pressure, the family's open suspicions, the daughter's unwavering claim, they stack into a tower that leans the same direction. Maybe the most unsettling part isn't what we know, it's what we can't see. Boxed up in evidence rooms and legal vaults, guarded by agencies and agreements whose job is to keep sensitive material out of daylight. As the pieces keep surfacing, a single conclusion keeps pressing forward. This was not random. Not a sudden gust that blew out a candle, but a storm constructed over time by people who understood exactly how wind works. Here's where we leave you. At the gate where questions outrun answers. The autopsy headlines name the manor, the courtroom named the culprit, but the sealed lines keep naming nobody and everybody all at once. If this was a coordinated erasure, how far would the gatekeepers of the industry go to keep their secrets safe? And who, even now, stands to benefit from the silence? Drop your theory below, tell us who you think sits behind the curtain, and say what you think those missing pages would show. Until the vault opens, keep your eyes sharp and your heart steady. We'll see you in the comments, family.